the forefront of inflammatory bowel disease research and care for over 50 years. Learn more about research, education, and support at Crohn's Colitis Foundation.org.
Is this the tether?
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
I'm a bad man. The Lakers and Clippers jump it up tonight at Crypto.com. First game for both teams in 3 days. Both teams are also 1-2 since the All-Star break. Important game for the Lakers at 31-28. The Lakers are 2.5 games out of the playoffs with 23 games left in the regular season. They need to get on the road pretty quick. The Clippers won't have Paul George tonight. He's missing his second straight game with a sore left knee. The Clippers are the home team. 7 p.m. tip-off on ESPN. Top 5 men's college basketball teams in this week's AP poll: Houston, Purdue, UConn, Tennessee, and Marquette. Dodgers fans got a treat yesterday. Shohei Ohtani hit a 2-run homer in his first game with his new team. It's only spring training, but this is what Dodgers fans want to see from a guy with a 10-year, $700 million contract. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Dr. Nicordelai Corte with the KBLA Talk 1580 editorial. In a public opinion survey commissioned by KBLA Talk 1580 and conducted by Viteris, the black voters surveyed were highly enthusiastic about the March 2024 primary. The race for Los Angeles District Attorney is being hotly contested. Incumbent DA George Gascon's efforts to implement progressive criminal justice reforms have generated pushback from within his own office, the broader law enforcement community, and some in the general public. He was the subject of at least 2 failed attempts to qualify recalls. The concerns about crime are reflected in the polling results of black voters. Nearly 1 in 4 have been victims of violent crime or have someone close to them who has been a victim. 1 in 5 black voters have personally been victims of property crime in the last 2 years. A majority of respondents feel less safe than they did a year or 2 ago, but they reject the notion that criminal justice reform has gone too far. This year, black voters will be looking for candidates who speak to the complexity of the issues as opposed to a one-size-fits-all approach. Nearly half of black voters have an unfavorable view of DA Gascon, but his challengers are largely unknown. Nearly half of the black voters are also undecided, which means there's a clear opportunity for candidates to connect with black voters. Our poll makes 3 things abundantly clear. Black voters matter. Black voters are closely following this race, and the candidates for DA have a lot of work to do. KBLA Talk 1580 is committed to the mobilization and use of the franchise to empower our audience to identify and pursue their interests in advancing equity, inclusive representation, and multiracial solidarity. For KBLA Talk 1580, I'm Dr. Nicordelai Corte. We welcome your feedback.
Live from historic Leimert Park in Los Angeles, California, I'm Tavis Smiley, and I'm so glad to see you and me back in stride again. Before we get started with today's show, let me invite you to follow me on Facebook and Instagram at The Real Tavis Smiley and get updates on X, that's formerly Twitter, at Tavis Smiley. By the way, should you miss any part of today's program or want to catch up on previous shows, you can always visit thetavissmileyshow.com. That's thetavissmileyshow.com or wherever you get your podcast, and listen to the Tavis Smiley podcast version of this live program at your leisure. Another great show on tap for you today. In our second hour, reporters Hunter Walker and Lupe P. Lupin join us to talk about their new book, The Truce, Progressives, Centrists, and the Future of the Democratic Party. No time like the present, in the midst of this campaign, to have a conversation about the future of the Democratic Party. So the book is called, once again, The Truce, Progressives, Centrists, and the Future of the Democratic Party. Look forward to having Hunter and Lupe join us today in our second hour. In our third hour, Mehcad Brooks plays NYPD Detective Jalen Shaw on NBC's long-running and game-changing show, Law and Order. You know the show when you hear the theme music, right? I was just talking yesterday about how these days TV shows don't have the great theme songs they used to. You hear that, you know it's Law and Order. Mehcad joins us today in hour 3 to talk about working on the franchise and much more, I suspect. Look forward to talking to actor Mehcad Brooks, who again plays NYPD Detective Jalen Shaw on Law and Order. That in our third hour. But in this first hour today, author and pastor Joyce Holliday on the history of self-immolation as an extreme, perhaps the ultimate tactic of protest in the campaign for peace and justice. You all know, we've discussed it a couple times on this program. We all saw the story that made not just national but international news when that active military officer in front of the Israeli embassy set himself on fire, doused himself, and engaged in a protest act of self-immolation. We've had some fascinating dialogues, as I said, about that on this program, including a conversation where one of our guests, Trita Parsi, as I recall, made a powerful point about the fact that the media so many in the media seem to play that as a case of mental illness. Indeed, when a number of networks, including MSNBC, reported the story on the screen, they had, as you often see, that suicide hotline. And that's not really what this was. This was an act of defiance. As I said, there's a history to self-immolation as a tactic of protest. And that's exactly what he was doing when you combine his act with his words, calling what he saw in Gaza, in Palestine, as genocide. But the media tried to play it one way, but that's really not what it really was. And there is a history of self-immolation as an act, as I said earlier, an extreme act of protest. I want to get to that in just a moment for the hour with our guest, Joyce Holliday. Before I do that, though, let me just announce to you what is already in the press today. It broke earlier today, but we are very pleased and humbled and just grateful that this program, which has now been in national syndication, we've been syndicated around the country just about 6 months now, not even quite 6 months, but just about 6 months. And we announced today, drum roll please, we announced today that we have expanded this program into some other major markets. And this is a big deal, to be in syndication for less than 6 months and to be syndicated today in New York City. And so we welcome WHCR 90.3 FM in New York City. That's Harlem Community Radio. Delighted to be heard in the coming days on WHCR 90.3 FM in the Big Apple. We also announced today the nation's capital. We ain't playing, y'all. WOL, 14 AM. We are now heard on WOL in the nation's capital. It's not just those two major markets, though. We're adding places like Milwaukee, WNOV, 860 AM in Milwaukee. We're adding places like Des Moines. Of course, this whole campaign started in Des Moines, in Iowa, the state, as it always does. KJMC, 89.3 FM in Des Moines. And so we just announced today a number of stations. I just want to give you a highlight of some of those. But again, to be in syndication for less than 6 months and to now have secured successfully spots in the nation's top 3 media markets. We, of course, are in L.A. Today we're adding New York City, and we have been on for a while now in Chicago. Those are the three biggest markets in this country, New York, L.A., and Chicago. And so we've added New York City today, and that's a big deal. So our rapid and continued expansion into key media markets represents, we think, an exciting new chapter in the story of this radio program. And as we move deeper into the 2024 election season, we will continue to do our best to provide our listener base, with enlightening and empowering programming unapologetically geared toward people of color, certainly African Americans. And so we are delighted to announce today that we have added New York City, we have added Washington, D.C., we have added Milwaukee, we've added Des Moines, and more other stations you can read about. Go to our platforms and check out our press release. But welcome New York, welcome Washington, D.C., welcome Des Moines, welcome Milwaukee, and all the others that are now carrying the Tavis Smiley Show around this country. Just wanted to just take a moment to acknowledge those stations and to thank them for the honor of being heard across their airwaves in these markets all across the nation. This program is growing, and we thank you for being a part of that audience. When we come forward, we'll commence our conversation about self-immolation as an act of protest in the campaign for peace and justice in this country and around the globe. You are listening, and I'm glad about it, to Tavis Smiley.
From the Mert Park with love, this is Tavis Smiley.
What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? This isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Joey from Vermont, a farmer trying to get through the winter. Adriana from South Carolina, a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Liam from Ohio, an injured father struggling to provide for his family. Hi, I'm Shanola Hampton, and I support the Feeding America network of food banks because they help provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.
Los Angeles County needs a new district attorney.
I'm Jeff Chemerinsky, and I'm running for district attorney. I have served as chief of the Violent and Organized Crime section of the Los Angeles United States Attorney's Office. I've never lost a case. I have experience managing large teams of lawyers and staff, and I've done it in the largest federal judicial district in the nation. I've been endorsed by civil rights attorney Connie Rice, by former LA County Supervisor Yvonne Braithwaite Burke, and by the New Frontier Democratic Club, the oldest and largest African-American Democratic club in California. I'm a lifelong Democrat. As your next district attorney, I'll do everything I can to make our community safer and reform our justice system for every community in Los Angeles.
Jeff Chemerinsky, Democrat for district attorney, endorsed by the leaders we trust. Our community can trust Jeff Chemerinsky to stand up for us. Vote by March 5th. Paid for by Jeff Chemerinsky for District Attorney 2024.
It's game day at Jim's house, and the spread is impressive.
Mike's already done some damage with the hot wings, and now he's dropping back and going deep for another slice of pizza.
I sure hope he brought the Pepto.
Mike knows the Pepto-Bismol provides fast 5-symptom relief from unexpected stomach upsets. He's no rookie.
The way he's throwing back those nachos, he's the GOAT.
Be ready for game day with Pepto-Bismol.
When you have nausea, heartburn, indigestion, upset stomach, diarrhea.
Use as directed. Keep out of reach of children.
Hey, what are you doing up on the step stool?
About to clean these light fixtures. The whole family's coming over. And if there's even a speck of dust in the house, my abuela will find it.
Here, I got a Swiffer duster to help with that.
A Swiffer what?
A Swiffer duster. It has this cool extendable handle that reaches 6 feet to get high and low, with fluffy dusters that easily trap and lock dust.
So no more step stool?
No more step stool.
Easily trap and lock dust from hard-to-reach places with the Swiffer duster. Love it or your money back.
May Fresh Daily in the Mert Park, Los Angeles, California. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
You are indeed, and I'm pleased to have you on in our listening audience today. Going to be a great show, and we start in this hour, as I mentioned, with author and pastor Joyce Holliday to talk about the history of self-immolation as an extreme tactic in the campaign for peace. Joyce Holliday, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. I hope you are.
I'm doing the best I can. If I complained, I'd be an ingrate, and I am delighted to have you on for this conversation, which is it's a terse and tense conversation, but I want to have it anyway because, again, as I mentioned moments ago, we all watched this young brother in front of the Israeli embassy douse himself. The video, of course, been taken down. He kind of streamed that thing live because he wanted people to see what he was doing. But it's an extreme act. And before I get to what happened specifically in front of the Israeli embassy, I want to just give you some time to educate me and the audience about the history of self-immolation. Like, how far back does this go? When we see it, obviously you can't. It's one of those things where you almost can't turn your eyes away because it's hard to imagine a human being setting himself or herself on fire. But give me the history of self-immolation.
Well, the earliest that I have found any information about it is way back in ancient India, when widows often threw themselves on the funeral pyres of their husbands so that they died in a kind of spiritual union with their husbands. In terms of self-immolation as a political protest, it first really came into our consciousness in this country when Buddhist monks in Vietnam set themselves on fire in protest, first of the French occupation of their country, but then as well in protest of the war that our country was carrying out against them. And their protest sparked several people in this country to self-immolate in reaction to that war. The first one was Alice Hers, a woman in Detroit who set herself on fire in early 1965. The one that I am most familiar with is Norman Morrison, who set himself on fire at the Pentagon on November 2nd, 1965. Actually, just about 40 feet away from Defense Secretary Robert McNamara's window as a way of protesting what we were doing in Vietnam. And specifically, he was so moved by the fact that people in villages, and particularly children, were being napalmed by our bombs. And he wanted to let the world know what it looks like to die by burning. He, until the very last moments, had his 1-year-old daughter in his arms with him, and gratefully he set her down before he set himself on fire. But he specifically wanted the world to know, we are bombing children in Vietnam. We're burning them. This is what it looks like. And he hoped that it would move people to protest and for there to be a change in our policy in Vietnam.
I want to ask, and I will in a moment, whether or not it did, in fact, have any impact on the conversation about our engagement in Vietnam. I should mention that since you raised the name of Norman Morrison, that our guest, Joyce Holliday, is the co-author of a book called Held in the Light, Norman Morrison's Sacrifice for Peace and His Family's Journey of Healing. She wrote that book with Morrison's widow, Anne Morrison Welsh, and so she knows what she speaks when she talks about one of the earlier cases, most notable cases of self-immolation in this country. And we should note that, as I said earlier, this American serviceman did this at the Israeli embassy in this country. This is an American who is setting himself on fire as an act of protest. And so while she starts out reminding us about Indian culture and about the Buddhist monks during the era of Vietnam, they're Americans who have engaged in this act of self-defiance as well. So let me come back now to a few things I want to probe, Joyce Holliday, now that you've sort of set the frame for me. Talk to me about the notion of sacrificing one's own life to save the life of others. Of course, we all know, those of us who are Christians know that that's what that first century Palestinian Jew named Jesus did for all the rest of us. Sacrificed his life for those who are believers, sacrificed his life for the lives of all the rest of us. That's at the epicenter. That is the crux of Christology. No question about that. And yet there are people who are sort of emulating that sacrifice when they set themselves on fire, when they self-immolate. So talk to me about this notion of sacrificing one's own life in hopes of saving the lives of others.
Well, as you mentioned at the beginning, and I've discovered this too, that I haven't read an article about Aaron Bushnell's sacrifice of himself at the Israeli embassy without there being a mention at the bottom about if you're thinking about suicide or if you're mentally imbalanced. And I would like to say that there's a very clear distinction between suicide and this kind of sacrifice. He did not take his life, he gave his life. And I think for those who want to put on people who take this kind of extreme act that they are mentally unstable, who want to say, you know, how could someone in their right mind do something this dramatic? I think they would say back, how can someone in their right mind bomb and burn children in Vietnam? How can they bomb and starve children in Gaza? Aaron Bushnell acknowledged before he set himself on fire that it was an extreme act, but he spoke a truth when he said it was not as extreme as what the Palestinians are suffering. And I think that he had decided, and I think very carefully and in a totally right mind, that he was willing to give up his life in the hope that it would be a wake-up call and that indeed it would save many people's lives. You know, we don't call it suicide when soldiers, knowing that many of them will lose their lives, march off to war, or when someone, say, throws himself on a grenade to save the lives of his buddies. And I think that Norman Morrison and Aaron Bushnell and others who've taken this step also believed that they were sacrificing their own lives to save the lives of many others. And it was a price for waging peace that they were willing to pay. People do a lot waging war and are willing to give up their lives for war. And I think they are just similarly saying they are willing to give up their lives for peace.
What you just said is a mouthful, and it was powerful, and let me just say, vexing to consider the way you just framed that when soldiers go off to war, and they have to know there's a good chance, certainly a chance they will not return home, or when soldiers jump on a grenade to save the life of their buddy, their fellow soldier. Nobody calls that suicide. We call that sacrifice. And not only do we call it sacrifice, we honor them for that. People end up getting the Purple Heart. We give them the Purple Heart for that kind of sacrifice. We don't call it suicide. But in this instance, Aaron Bushnell, to George Holliday's point, self-immolates, and we want to put it in the frame of mental illness and suicide, not in the form or in the frame of an extreme tactic in, as I said earlier, a campaign for peace. Which leads me to ask this, because here is a distinction. If I'm playing devil's advocate, and I will for a moment, Aaron Bushnell intentionally set himself on fire, self-immolated, knowing that he was going to die. When soldiers go off to war, they hope to be victorious. They hope to come back home. They don't go there intending to kill themselves. They're not engaging on behalf of this country because they want to die. It is obviously likely. It's always possible. But they're not intending to take their own lives. That distinction would make a difference for some people, Joyce Holliday.
Yes, I think you're right. But I think that every soldier who goes off is willing to die and feels that if they died, it's a sacrifice that would be worth it. That it's a cause that they believe in. And I think that in Aaron Bushnell's case, he realized that what the United States is doing in its support of Israel with weapons and military aid is supporting Israel's genocide against Gaza. And there are many experts who have called it genocide. The International Court of Justice is talking now about the fact that it's genocide. And I think that he believed that he had to do something extreme. He was no longer willing to participate in that as part of the U.S. Air Force, and acknowledged it was extreme, but felt that that's what it was going to take for him to live out of his conscience and his unwillingness to be complicit in that, and in the hope that it would get people talking, which it has done. I mean, here we are.
Yeah, I was about to ask whether or not these acts actually work, and I pulled myself back from asking that question and said, Tavis, you're talking about it on national radio with Joyce Holliday.
Exactly.
So clearly it worked. It got people's attention. We are talking about this act, this extreme tactic in the context of what's happening in the Middle East, and I doubt very, very highly. I doubt very sincerely that his act of self-immolation got Joe Biden to move in the last 36 hours or so to say he expects a ceasefire in the next week. I'm not sure it was connected to Aaron Bushnell's act, but certainly a movement is happening, taking place, we believe, and we shall see what happens in the next week or so. But we're talking about it, and so to that extent, it does make a difference, and it pushed the envelope, so to speak. Help me out.
And let me just say that
sure.
I think that when we talk about did it work, like there's not really a way to gauge whether or not it worked.
Sure.
I think one thing that I would say is that in the case of Norman Morrison, Robert McNamara wrote in his memoir, in retrospect, that Norman Morrison's self-immolation outside his window was one of the most important things in turning him against the war. And he apologized for U.S. policy in Vietnam in his memoir. Now, the war raged on for another 10 years, so in that sense, it didn't immediately stop it, just like the hope for a ceasefire in Gaza probably isn't going to immediately happen because of something that Aaron Bushnell did. But it planted seeds of doubt in Robert McNamara, and there are unclassified documents now that show that he was trying to convince Lyndon Johnson to stop the bombing in Vietnam. And one of the main things that moved him to do that was what Norman Morrison did. And I would also like to say that his widow, Anne Morrison Welsh, who I worked with on her memoir, and it is a very compelling and courageous journey that she was on of grappling with her grief and then finding her way to forgiveness. She found out that her husband had self-immolated through a Newsweek reporter. She did not know that he was going to do this. So her story is very powerful and very compelling, and it took her a long time, but in April 1999, she went to Vietnam, and she was overwhelmed with the impact that it had there, because she had no idea. Person after person came up to her with tears streaming down their face saying, I couldn't believe that there was an American who believed that our lives are as important as American lives. And, people considered Norman a hero and a saint, and the poet laureate of North Vietnam wrote a poem about Emily, the 1-year-old daughter that Norman had in his hands, and every school child in Vietnam memorized that poem. And when they went to Vietnam, everyone knew who they were. And Anne was so moved to see that, though she wasn't sure that Norman's sacrifice had any impact here, it had a huge impact among the people of Vietnam. They said to her often, he will live forever in our hearts.
That's a powerful story. I'm glad you shared that. When we think of Robert McNamara, and for those who don't know the name Robert McNamara, we kind of jumped into that. He was, of course, the defense secretary during the war in Vietnam, and he waged that campaign for years. And ultimately, as Joyce Holliday says, in the writing of his memoir, he reflected on that moment and realized he'd made a huge mistake. Of course, there were other people like Martin Luther King Jr. who were out really early on this, saying that this was a huge mistake and that America would regret this. He said, America, you have become the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. Those are the words that Dr. King spoke at the Riverside Church on the Upper West Side in Manhattan when he gave that Beyond Vietnam speech, and that speech put a target on his back. He gives that speech April 4, 1967, and they killed him 1 year to the day, almost to the very hour. 1 year later, April 4, 68, they killed him. But that speech got Martin in a lot of trouble and had the whole world, basically the whole country, sort of turn against him for coming out so aggressively and so forcefully against the war in Vietnam. Well, fast forward some years, and Robert McNamara, who waged that war, as George Holliday said earlier, eventually in his memoir apologized and said he'd made a mistake. But he writes in that book that it was Norman Morrison's self-immolation just outside his office that made him rethink and got his attention. And so this extreme act of Aaron Bushnell just days ago in front of the Israeli embassy has kicked up a great conversation, and I've got a great deal more questions to ask of Joyce Holliday when we come forward talking about self-immolation as an act of protest for peace. One of the questions I want to ask you right quick is how something that many see as so violent can advance a conversation about peace. Isn't that oxymoronic? More to go with Joyce Holliday when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
Unapologetically progressive. Unapologetically black. You're tapped into Tavis Smiley.
If you're like me, 60 and retired, making ends meet, especially here at the supermarket and drugstore, is tough. I'm so blessed to have found benefitscheckup.org. It's a free and confidential website from the National Council on Aging that connected me to $1,200 a year in programs that help pay for food, medicine, utilities, and more. Maybe it can help you. benefitscheckup.org.
My daughter was diagnosed with a rare malignant rhabdoid tumor on the spine. They sent her straight to St. Jude. My hope was gone. But when you get there, everyone's like, hey, we're not going to give up. And when you see other people not giving up on your child, that makes all the difference in the world. When I found out I didn't have to pay, I was just grateful. They saved my baby's life.
Finding cures, saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. In Illinois, a former employee of a West Suburban Elmhurst auto dealership is accusing his ex-employer of racial discrimination. Andre Jennings says that he was fired from his job as a salesman at Ed Napleton's Elmhurst Imports Kia in April of 2022. The suit alleges the plaintiff was routinely referred to by a racial slur by his supervisor at the dealership and that he was paid less than his white colleagues. Over 380,000 Toyota Tacoma trucks in the U.S. are being recalled due to an increased risk of crashing. Toyota announced the recall Tuesday, saying welding debris left on the rear axle assembly can cause retaining nuts to loosen and fall off. It could cause a part to separate from the axle, impacting the vehicle's stability and how it brakes. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
The Crohn's and Colitis Foundation has been at the forefront of inflammatory bowel disease research and care for over 50 years. Learn more about research, education, and support at Crohn'sColitisFoundation.org.
Is this the title? This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Lakers and Clippers jump it up tonight at Crypto.com. First game for both teams in 3 days. Both teams are also 1-2 since the All-Star break. Important game for the Lakers at 31-28. The Lakers are 2.5 games out of the playoffs with 23 games left in the regular season. They need to get on the road pretty quick. The Clippers won't have Paul George tonight. He's missing his second straight game with a sore left knee. The Clippers are the home team. 7 p.m. tip-off on ESPN. Top 5 men's college basketball teams in this week's AP poll: Houston, Purdue, UConn, Tennessee, and Marquette. Dodgers fans got a treat yesterday. Shohei Ohtani hit a 2-run homer in his first game with his new team. It's only spring training, but this is what Dodgers fans want to see from a guy with a 10-year, $700 million contract. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
All I need is one mic.
With a KBLA Talk 1580 editorial, I'm Tavis Smiley. Recently, the Washington Post ran a major story which in sum reveals that racial discrimination in jury selection persists in America. Most often, the practice occurs through a legal tactic called peremptory challenge, which allows an attorney to strike a potential juror without having to state a reason. In the 1986 Batson Doctrine, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the use of peremptory challenges to exclude potential jurors solely based on their race violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. By the way, the late great Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall despised peremptory challenges. New data in the Washington Post story underscores that nearly 40 years after the Batson decision, the problem remains widespread. One study in the Deep South found that black jurors are being challenged and dismissed at double and triple the rates of other prospective jurors. Bottom line, it's racist, it's wrong, and it's pervasive, even as research shows that racially diverse juries spend more time deliberating, make fewer errors, and can result in fairer trials. One of the arguments in the Ninth Circuit appeal, brought by former LA City Councilman Mark Ridley Thomas, is about violation of that Batson doctrine. In its case against MRT, the U.S. Attorney's Office struck black women from the jury pool based on demeanor and employment status, a clear violation of the law. A long list of high-profile black law professors, historians, and justice centers have now filed amicus briefs in support of MRT's position. But the irony of a black elected official who for more than 3 decades represented the best interests of his black constituents, having black women voters struck from his jury pool is repugnant and morally wrong. So much for being judged by a jury of your peers. MRT's legal team argues correctly in its filing that given well-established law and legal principles set forth by the Supreme Court, Ninth Circuit, and state courts and legislatures, the Ninth Circuit should likewise reaffirm and clearly state that applying facially neutral justifications in discriminatory ways to target black women and other protected groups presumptively violates Batson. I couldn't agree more. For KBLA Talk 1580, I'm Tavis Smiley. We welcome your comments.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Race, culture wars, political turf battles, criminal justice and injustice, the courts. These are the conversations you won't hear elsewhere. My guests are leading journalists, celebrities, and sports figures, elected leaders, and influencers. They aren't afraid to get into it and say the quiet part out loud. With Ariva Martin in real time, your commute just became the most engaging part of your day. Tune in weekdays from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. or find us on YouTube. Ariva Martin in real time, when you want it straight, no chaser.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black. Let's get back to more of this rich dialogue with Tavis Smiley.
Back to more of this rich dialogue with Joyce Holliday, who is an author and pastor, as we continue our dialogue about self-immolation as an extreme act of protest in the campaign for peace. She's the co-author of the book, Held in the Light, Norman Morrison's Sacrifice for Peace and His Family's Journey of Healing. Norman Morrison was the man who set himself on fire, self-immolated after sitting down his 1-year-old baby, self-immolated right outside the office of Robert McNamara, who was then Secretary of the Defense Department during the war in Vietnam. And the impact that Norman Morrison's sacrifice had on Robert McNamara is detailed in McNamara's memoir, where he apologizes for being the defense secretary and engaging us, involving us in this war in Vietnam, where too many precious lives were lost, not just American soldiers, but indeed the people of Vietnam, including too many women and children. And so here we are now in 2024, and Aaron Bushnell self-immolates outside the Israeli embassy, and we're talking about that. One of the things that I want to talk about, Joyce Holliday, right quick here, is the fact that he was an active military officer. And that part of the story, I think, has been head-scratching for some people. How do you read the fact that Aaron Bushnell was in the U.S. military, in the Air Force, and decided to do this?
Well, I think that for me that brings a particular power to it, because he was well aware of the U.S. support of Israel in its total siege of Gaza, which is the words of the Israeli defense minister. They're carrying out a total siege of Gaza. 30,000 people dead that we know of, many more under the rubble, thousands more wounded. People are starving. They've been cornered, and Israel is gearing up now to assault the city of Rafah, where they told people to go, where they would be safe. So I think that because of his involvement in the military, Aaron Bushnell knew what was going on. He knew that it is genocide, that the goal of this is the obliteration of an entire people. And he knew that as an active military person, he was complicit in it. Even if he didn't drop a bomb, even if he wasn't in Gaza. And I might say we're all complicit in it. If we pay our taxes, some of that tax money goes to support Israel in this war. And so I think in the most powerful way that he could, he was saying, I know what's going on. I no longer will participate in it. And this is the way to know to get out of it in a way that will maybe let others, force others to look at their own complicity in what's going on. I'm so grateful for all the protests that are going on and all the calls for a ceasefire all over this country and the world. And I'm particularly moved by the fact that a lot of that is being carried out by Jewish Voice for Peace. There are Jews in this country who are leading some of the protest against what Israel is doing against Gaza. And I think that Aaron Bushnell is one piece of that. It was violent, as you said. It's not something that I would ever do. And let me be clear, I'm not here advocating it or encouraging anyone else to do it. But I do think that it's very, very important that we look deeply as to why he did it and what that particular act was pointing to.
Yep.
Because otherwise, we're not going to look at our own complicity.
No, I hear your point. I want to ask you in a moment about the violent nature of this act as juxtaposed against it being a statement about why we need peace in the world. We'll come to that in just a second. There's some breaking news here that I need to share with you. Mitch McConnell, who you all know, of course, as the Senate Republican leader, has announced, having turned 82 last week, that he will step down as Republican leader in the Senate. He is the longest-serving Senate leader in history, who has maintained his power in the face of dramatic convulsions in his own party for almost 2 decades now, announcing that he will step down from his post in November. I quote from him, one of life's most underappreciated talents is to know when it's time to move on to life's next chapter. So I stand before you today to say that this will be my last term as Republican leader of the Senate, close quote. Those words uttered by Mitch McConnell on the floor of the U.S. Senate. And so Mitch McConnell will step down as Senate Republican leader in November after a record run in the job. Breaking news there out of Washington, and wanted to share that with you post haste. Now back to this point about the violent nature of this self-immolation act that we saw Aaron Bushnell perform in front of the Israeli embassy. How do I square such a violent act in an effort to get us to focus on peace, Joyce Holliday?
Well, it was violent in one sense of looking at it, but in his own words, even though it was extreme, he was pointing to how extreme the situation is for Palestinians. War is violent. War is much more violent than what he did. And I honestly am quite struck as I watched the video, and I watched it a few times, the peacefulness with which he did what he did, the clarity that he had, the certainty that he had, and the fact that it was an act of conscience, it was a self-chosen sacrifice. And so one way of looking at it is that it was violent, but another way of looking at it, and it was the way that he looked at it, was to do what he did might in fact end a lot of violence for other people.
When we come forward, I want to get your take as an author and a pastor. I'm tapping into the latter now, the pastor's robe that you wear. We live in a world, and certainly in a country, where above all else, we value life. Nobody wants to die. You made a powerful point earlier that there's a distinct difference between somebody taking your life and someone giving their life. Aaron Bushnell gave his life. And it's hard for, I think, many of us to wrap our brains around it because, again, we live in a culture where above all else, we value life. Everybody wants to live. We're trying to, look at the industry of all the products that help you live longer. Everybody wants to live a long life until we get to a point where we're incapacitated. And then maybe we say, okay, I don't want to be here in this position. I don't want to be laying here like this. But all things considered, everybody wants to live. We value life above everything else. And I'm curious as to how one even comes to a decision in that frame to give his or her own life. I want to tell a quick story about an interview I had, a conversation I had some time ago on this program with a guy named Kevin Hines, who jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge back in 2000 and survived. The story of how he survived, including sea lions and the Coast Guard, and it's just an amazing story of his survival of that jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. But he's been all around the world talking about this issue since he survived. There's a particular part of that story of his survival, and that was a suicide attempt. Aaron Bushnell's taking of his life was a sacrifice. I get the distinction, but I want to weave these two things together when we come forward. George Holiday on Tavis Smiley.
This is getting good. Yeah, man. Tavis Smiley continues when we come forward.
What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? This isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Joey from Vermont, a farmer trying to get through the winter. Adriana from South Carolina, a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Liam from Ohio, an injured father struggling to provide for his family. Hi, I'm Shanola Hampton, and I support the Feeding America network of food banks because they help provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we do Black history every single day. In fact, as the only Black talk radio station west of the Mississippi, we are Black history. Our annual Black History Month luncheon is fast approaching, and we want to be sure to give you ample time to get your company, organization, church, or group to join us at this year's celebration on the last day of the month, Thursday, February 29th at noon. Last year, we honored iconic local Black media personalities, including Pat Harvey, Jim Hill, Mark Brown, Beverly White, Sandy Banks, and Pat Prescott, and raised $20,000 in scholarships. This year, we're honoring Black Hollywood creatives who have used their artistic genius as climate justice champions. At this year's luncheon, we will be showcasing and sharing their inspiring work on our big screen. Plus, a scrumptious meal, live music, great company, and lots of fun with your favorite KBLA Talk 1580 hosts. So contact us today at info@smileyAudiomedia.com or call 323-290-4690. That's info@smileyAudiomedia.com or call 323-290-4690. We hope to see you Thursday, February 29th as we close out Black History Month. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your Black.
Do you support public education? More than 38,000 educators at United Teachers Los Angeles do too. Together, we have fought for a better public education for our students and communities, and having you on our side has been essential in our fight for better public schools. Together, we will continue to work for public schools with green spaces, more mental health staff, smaller class sizes at every grade level, and a higher investment in the Black Student Achievement Plan. We are UTLA, and you make us stronger.
Sounds different. This is Tavis Smiley.
There's no way to know this, George Holiday, but I want to just tap into your expertise on this. Well, let me hold that for a second. I want to start with this. We value life in this country above all else. What say you about the process that one goes through to decide that one wants to sacrifice their life? That part is hard for us to wrap our brains around since we all want to live and nobody wants to die.
Yes, and I don't think that's a question that I can answer. I don't know what kind of process Aaron Bushnell went through or Norman Morrison went through. Mm-hmm. All that I know that in Norman's case, it was done very prayerfully. Mm-hmm. And very intentionally, and I don't know anything about the faith of Aaron Bushnell, but it was clearly done very intentionally on his part too. And to go back to what you were saying before the break about the difference between the suicide and the sacrifice, I do not want to judge people who commit suicide any more than I want to judge people who self-immolate. I think that calls for compassion, not judgment. Mm-hmm. But in my dealings with people who have been in a place where they were considering taking their own life, at the heart of all of those conversations was despair and a sense that they had no hope for living in this world and that taking their lives would bring them a sense of relief. In the case of Norman and Aaron and people who come to a decision to sacrifice their lives, I think it very much comes out of a place of hope that may not seem rational to us. But when I watch Aaron Bushnell walking up to the gate at the embassy and taking out the kerosene and pouring on himself and lighting his lighter, and even as he spoke before he got there, I didn't hear any despair in him at all. Mm-hmm. I believe he did it out of hope, and that his hope was that this would be a wake-up call, that this would let people look at the details to know how desperate things are in Gaza, that he would feel pushed to take his own life to try to make a statement. And so his question to us is, what are we going to do? Mm-hmm. Yeah. We may not set ourselves on fire, but what are we going to do to end our complicity in what is happening in Gaza?
It's a powerful and persuasive and poignant question that we all have to wrestle with, and that story, that response that you just offered takes me straight to the story by Kevin Hines, who I interviewed some years ago after he survived a jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. I want to juxtapose what Kevin did with what Aaron did in our remaining moments with Joyce Holliday when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
If you're like me, 60 and retired, making ends meet, especially here at the supermarket and drugstore, is tough. I'm so blessed to have found benefitscheckup.org. It's a free and confidential website from the National Council on Aging that connected me to $1,200 a year in programs that help pay for food, medicine, utilities, and more. Maybe it can help you. benefitscheckup.org.
My daughter was diagnosed with a rare malignant rhabdoid tumor on the spine. They sent her straight to St. Jude. My hope was gone. But when you get there, everyone's like, hey, we're not going to give up. And when you see other people not giving up on your child, that makes all the difference in the world. When I found out I didn't have to pay, I was just grateful they saved my baby's life.
Finding cures, saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 reminding you that we keep us safe. Pro Football Hall of Famer and urban peace pioneer Jim Brown believed in just that. So he founded the Amera I Can Foundation for Social Change in 1988, focusing on at-risk and high-risk youth in underserved schools and juvenile detention facilities, as well as adult incarceration and reentry initiatives. The core of the Amera I Can program is its 15-chapter life skills curriculum. Mastery of these skills allows individuals to meet their academic academic potential, conform their behavior to acceptable societal standards, and improve the quality of their lives by equipping them with what they need to confidently and successfully contribute to society. Today, the foundation is led by its president, Monique Brown, who has been actively involved in the organization for more than 25 years. The Amera ICANN Foundation continues its work in memory of its founder, actor, philanthropist, and NFL legend Jim Brown. To get involved or make a donation, please visit AmeriICANCommunity.partners. That's AmeriICANCommunity.partners. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
My mom has taken up going to the park to practice yoga.
My dad's going to a club, but not a book club, a salsa club.
Finding new hobbies comes with age.
My mom has started getting lost and not knowing where she's going.
Becoming lost or disoriented doesn't. Confusion with time or place may be a sign of Alzheimer's. An early diagnosis can help improve the quality of life for your loved one. Learn the warning signs of Alzheimer's at 10signs.org. Brought to you by the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
I started vaping my freshman year of high school, mostly because all my friends had vapes. I wanted to fit in with them and look cool and be a part of everything that they were doing. The hardest part about quitting for me was all my friends still hitting their vapes right next to me. It was really frustrating and confusing when I was trying to quit because in my head I knew I didn't want to do it anymore, but for some reason my brain still wanted it.
No quit story is the same. For free support, text Kick Nicotine to 66819 today.
Ready to re-examine your assumptions and expand your inventory of ideas? More of Tavis Smiley coming your way right now.
I don't have too much time to get into the details of all this, but I implore you to Google the name Kevin Hines and read the backstory to his jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, of course, in the year 2000, and how he was rescued by some sea lions who kept him above water until the Coast Guard arrived, and how a woman standing there when he jumped had a brother who worked in the Coast Guard, who she called immediately. He just happened to be working miles away in the Coast Guard that day and rushed to the scene while the sea lions held Kevin Hines up in the water. And he broke so many bones in his body, and the only way really to survive was to see a specialist when he got into the hospital. A specialist in the specific kind of surgery he needed to save his life. As God would have it, it just so happened that surgeon, the foremost surgeon in the world, I believe, was based in Boston, but he happened that day to be in San Francisco and just happened to be at that hospital in San Francisco when they brought Kevin Hines in. That interview we had on our program, it should be in our podcast profile somewhere. But if you can get your hands on that Kevin Hines conversation about how his life was spared after jumping off that bridge, it's an amazing, amazing story. I share that because I was struck, Joyce Holliday, by your sense, and I saw the same thing, that Aaron Bushnell seemed so calm when he self-immolated in front of the Israeli embassy. He was clear in his decision, clear in his conscience, clear in his choice to engage in this extreme tactic to save the lives of others, to draw our attention to what's happening in the Middle East, to talk about peace. Kevin Hines told me in that conversation that he'd never talked to a survivor of a suicide attempt who did not regret it the moment that they did it. Kevin told me the minute he jumped off that bridge, as despairing as he was, the minute that he jumped, he regretted that he jumped. I did not get the sense, nor did you, watching that video of Aaron Bushnell self-immolate outside that embassy in D.C., that he regretted what he did. I do not know. We will never know. But it's an interesting juxtaposition, is it not?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I think that you are absolutely right, that Aaron was calm. He knew what he was doing. And I hope that we won't let his sacrifice be in vain, but that, in fact, we will keep talking and protesting and raising our voices and try to bring some peace into the world, especially for the people of Gaza.
We'll leave it on that note. Can't do much better than that. Joyce Holliday, we thank you for your work, for your witness, for sharing your insights in this hour. She is the co-author of the book Held in the Light, Norman Morrison's Sacrifice for Peace and his family's journey of healing. In case you've just tuned in, Norman Morrison self-immolated outside the office of Robert McNamara as he was defense secretary waging this war in Vietnam. He later apologized for that and said it was the self-immolation of Norman Morrison that made him start to rethink whether we were on the wrong track under his leadership engaging in this war in Vietnam. And here comes Aaron Bush now, all these years later, with an extreme act of self-sacrifice that we are talking about, hopefully, as Joyce said, in the context of peace in the globe, in the world. Joyce, thank you for your time. Good to have you on. All the best to you.
Thank you very much.
My great delight to have you. More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. In Illinois, a former employee of a West Suburban Elmhurst auto dealership is accusing his ex-employer of racial discrimination. Andre Jennings says that he was fired from his job as a salesman at Ed Napleton's Elmhurst Imports Kia in April of 2022. The